Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Statistics Solutions webinar on Chapter 2, the Literature Review. A couple things before we get started. Just a few words about us. Here's some information about us and some contact information. We're a full service dissertation consulting company. We offer everything from editing to help with statistics and everything in between. A lot of it is developmental editing, which means that it's more than line by line editing. It's consulting. It's helping you to kind of develop drafts into final form for submission, and then helping you with comments after you receive comments after you submit. So if any of that sounds like it might be you might be interested in, here's our contact information. We'll have that up again at the end. In the chat box right now, you see our co-host Sierra posting some links. There's a link to our website that has resources, a lot of dissertation resources, sample chapters, kind of content, the explanation of the content that goes into the chapters, blogs on a variety of topics. We also archive the webinars there, this webinar as well as other webinars. I believe you will also get a copy of this webinar as well. So there's a lot that we have on the website. We have a lot of resources there. Okay, so let's get to the webinar. If you have any questions as we proceed, that's fine. You can jot them down so you don't forget them, or you can even put them in the question and answer box or the chat box. But I'll get to the questions at the end. But if you want to throw them in the box so you don't forget them, that's fine. But we will have that question and answer session at the end. Okay. All right, so just to kind of pull back for a minute and look at the purpose of the lit review, get a big picture of it before we kind of delve into it and see what it entails. The literature review, well, let me go back one more step. Our model for, chapter 2 being the lit review, follows a pretty standard social sciences dissertation model, which is the 5-chapter model, with chapter 1 being the introduction, chapter 2 being the literature review, chapter 3 being the methods chapter, chapter 4 being where you present your findings, your results, and chapter 5 is where you discuss your findings. Okay, so now there are some variations to that, but the literature review will be a component, whether it's whatever chapter it falls into, but typically it's chapter 2. So the literature review, yes, it's a long chapter. I've seen lit reviews 10 pages long. I've seen lit reviews 80 pages long. The sweet spot seems to be about 30, 25 to 40, give or take. But around 25 to 30. It's a long chapter. It involves a lot of research. So organization is going to be important, right? Because you're going to have a lot of information. You're going to have to present it in a manner that makes sense, right? That's organized and intelligible to the reader and to yourself. So it's a long chapter. It's a difficult chapter. It's just what it is, and it's part of what you have to get through. But the purpose of the literature review is not just to kind of say, hey, here's all this research on my topic. That's part of it. You are covering the research on your topic, but it's, in large part, it's an argument for your research problem. Okay, so it you have your research problem, which is what drives the study, right? There's an issue, or there's some resolved issue in the research. There's some kind of problem or something that's inconclusive or not known in the research. That's your research problem. That's why your study exists, to get information to address that research problem. The lit review it does cover research on your topic, but it's always driving toward that research problem. Here's the research on the topic, but yet we still don't have this, whatever research that you're looking for. So in large part, the lit review, you always kind of want to bring things back to your research problem. How does the research connect to what you're doing? All right, so this is kind of the overall purpose. So it's not just contextual, it's not just to provide a context for your study, it's to also argue to show what's in the literature, and then also highlight and argue for the study of what's not in the literature, which is what your study is designed to do. Okay, here's what we're going to be covering today, the sections. Okay, so let's get started. Introduction to the lit review is pretty clear cut. Now, let me say this too, and you're going to hear me say this a couple times throughout the presentation. This is a good general a guide for the chapter, but you always want to follow your school's template if they have one. It'll probably be very similar. Of course, the specifics of what goes into the chapter will be based on what you're studying, right? But things like the introduction, where you review the literature, the theoretical framework, those things are pretty standard. But again, sometimes schools have little things that may be different. So you always want to follow your school's template, and that's what your professors will look at when they review your documents. Still, one of the first things they'll do is to see how closely it's aligning to what you've been asked to provide. Okay, so for the introduction, typically restate the purpose of your study, and remind the reader of the importance of your study and why it's needed. This is going to sound like material from chapter 1, which yes, it is. And the purpose of the introduction here is just to reorient your reader about what you're doing, to remind them what you're doing and why. So restate the purpose, remind the reader of your research problem, for the importance of the study, why it needs to be conducted. And if you want, you can preview contents of the chapter, right? The section headings preview what's going to come. And that's all for the introduction. It's not long, less than a page. Usually next, again, consult your template, because schools are different. Some schools don't have this section, a lot of them do. Sometimes it's called methods of searching. Sometimes it's just called literature search strategy. But this is where you want to describe your strategies and your methods that you use to search for research on your topic. And the idea here is the literature review, the chapter, it needs to be fairly comprehensive, right? So what this search description does, it shows your professors and your readers what you did to search for the material, and it helps them show that you cast a wide net. You did things appropriately to get comprehensive material. So there's certain things you want to hit here in the literature search strategy. Obviously talk about where you look, if it was like your university library, through the online portal, stake that up front. I used Liberty University's online library portal to search for, material for this lit review. You want to list any databases and other search tools you use besides, the library, within the library. So Google Scholar, probably, everybody uses that. But specific databases, like if you're in education, there's a database called ERIC, E-R-I-C, and it is an acronym. So there's disciplines, there's databases specific to your discipline, right? A business, whatever it happens to be, list those databases to psychology, right? There's specific databases for psychology, for medicine, for nursing. So any of those specialized databases that you use and any other search tools, you want to list those. If you searched any specialized journal, if you got that kind of narrow, and you looked at special journals, you put that in there. Key terms and combinations of key terms that you searched, you want to list those. And these won't be mysteries to you, because they'll be your variables, your factors, the things that you're studying, your major concepts, if it's qualitative, your theories. So you're going to be searching what you're studying. So include those search terms. And something good for this section, and for the whole dissertation, use your resources like that we provide. Any other resource you can use, your professors, your school librarians. But at the end of the day, sometimes there's just nothing better to help you when you sit down to write than having a sample dissertation, right? An approved dissertation from your school, close to your area, what you're doing your study on. Examples can be really helpful. You just see how other people have handled these sections in the past. The last item here is really important too. Include any way that you filtered or qualified your search. So that means, if you only, there's ways you can filter your search, right? So if you want to get back only material that's in English, you can click a button that says just, return only English only articles. Same for full text. If you just, sometimes they'll just give you the abstracts and it won't be full text. If you want things returned to you that are just full text, you can click that. But these last two are real important: date of publication and peer reviewed. Date of publication is important because some schools have requirements for the lit review material, right? That they want most of the lit review material to be recent, right? And I know this is, I believe it's Walden, like recent within 5 years. Some schools, it's recent within like 7 to 10. Some schools don't have any guidelines. They let you use material, old material. So if your schools are one of those that has the time requirement, like they want things published within 5 years, then this part's going to be important for you to mention in this section, that you limited your search to primarily, articles and studies that were published within the last 5 years. Or technically they count at 5 years from your anticipated date of graduation. So that would be important to say if your school has that requirement. Now, again, double check your template to see if it does. Some schools want that, some schools don't. Generally speaking, my advice is to try to keep things recent when possible, because the lit review, unless something is historically foundational, and there are studies that you need to include because they're foundational, they're seminal, they're integral to the research. But generally speaking, the lit review is a kind of a snapshot of the state of the research at the time, right? So if you're bringing in research 20 years ago, again, unless it's foundational, it may not be relevant, right? So my general advice is to keep things as recent when possible. And sometimes your chair will ask you to update things anyway. So that will save you having to do that later on. And peer-reviewed academic articles. This is another important, when you conduct your search for material, there will be an option. These options appear as clickable boxes usually. Do you want material returned that is peer reviewed? And you should click yes. because that is the gold standard for material that should be included in your lit review, is peer-reviewed studies, peer-reviewed articles. Informational stuff like maybe off government websites. You can bring that in if you need statistics or something, or some background material, but typically you're not reviewing informational material. You're using it kind of for information. So the research that you're reviewing are peer-reviewed articles and peer-reviewed studies. And how can you tell if an article is peer-reviewed? Well, the easiest way is when you search is if you click that button, what you should get back is only peer-reviewed material. And usually right on the bibliographic information at the top, the title and the publisher and the year and the authors, it should let you know if it's peer-reviewed. All right, so that section, it seems like there's a lot in there, but it's not going to be very long, right? Probably less than a page, maybe a page. Okay, next is usually, again, consult your template. Usually it's a theoretical framework. What happens with most schools is there's a theoretical framework introduction, or kind of a small discussion of the theoretical framework in chapter 1, and there's a more extended discussion of the theoretical framework in chapter 2. Now that's really typical. Some schools have it just in chapter 1, some schools have it just in chapter 2. So check your template. If it's an extended discussion of the framework that appears in chapter 1, I mean, it's going to be similar, but you're going to add more. And the way to handle this theoretical framework section is, just come out at the beginning and say what you're going to use for your theoretical framework. Goldman's theory of emotional intelligence will serve as a theoretical framework for this study, period. Talk a little bit about who developed the theory, the year, have a source, year. And theories explain things, right? So talk a little bit about what the person who developed the theory, why did they develop it, to explain what. Define the theory, right? Define it. Theories sometimes have components. If you're looking at those components as part of your study, define those components, right? Discuss a little bit about what other researchers have used the theory for, to show that that people are using it, that it's important, that it's relevant. Discuss a little bit what, and the next part is connect to your study. How does this theory relate to or connect to your study? How does it help explain? How's it going to help guide? How's it going to help explain what you're doing? And this is going to be a kind of a tricky little section too. So this is good to look at other people's, an approved dissertation, or, ask your chair for help. And in chapter 1, we go a little bit more over the theoretical framework, like what it is. I guess we can do that a little bit here. And if you need a conceptual framework or a theoretical framework, theoretical framework and conceptual framework, it's kind of like what they sound. A theoretical framework involves theories, conceptual framework involves concepts. I take a real practical approach to the difference between a theoretical framework and a conceptual framework. Theoretical frameworks typically are more associated with quantitative studies. Conceptual frameworks are typically more associated with qualitative studies, and the reason for that is quantitative studies proceed deductively. So you're taking a theoretical premise, a theory, and you're going to use that theory to help explain what you find, to see if what you find is that theory is applicable to what you find in a specific population. Qualitative studies kind of work in the reverse. They're inductive, right? So you don't need a theoretical overlay. You want when you talk to, if you're doing a qualitative study and you're using interviews, which is pretty standard, you want what people say to give you your answers. You know, you want the richness and the answers to be in their statements, right? So you don't want to kind of put a theoretical overlay over that, right? You kind of want the data to kind of speak for itself. So usually use a conceptual framework, which is similar to a theoretical framework, except that instead of using theories, you're using concepts. Because it's usually more exploratory. There may not be a theory for what you're looking at. So the same thing would apply, but you're using a concept or concepts from the research. It's kind of the difference. We do have blogs on that between the difference, if you're interested in learning more about the difference between those two, on our website. Okay. Right, that's the theoretical framework. And again, this is a good place to look for, you know, at samples, example dissertations. Okay, literature search strategy, we did that. Theoretical framework. After the theoretical framework is usually the actual review of the literature, and this is the kind of the lion's share really of the lit review. It's about 80% of the lit review. This is where you bring in the research that you've searched and you found, and you've kind of winnowed through it, and you know, got the research that's most applicable to your study. This is where you review it, you dig into it, analyze it, and you talk about how it relates to your study. This is where organization becomes important, because you can have a lot of data, you can have a lot of studies. Oh my God, how's this? What do I do with it all? Well, the first thing, you know, start with an outline, and the outline is it's gonna be based on the things that you need to cover in the lit review are going to be whatever you're studying, right? If it's quantitative, you're gonna have factors or variables. That you're going to want sections on those, right? Those are going to guide the organization of your study. If it's qualitative, you're still going to have major concepts or the things that you're looking at. Those should be the topics of these organization of this section. So it should have subsections, right? For these concepts, for these variables. Right, so cover recent literature on your factors, variables, and major concepts. Use headers to organize material, right? Okay. Right. So if you have a section, right, on you're studying emotional intelligence, right? You have a section on the research on emotional intelligence. Before you get into kind of discussing the research, usually you should have a little introduction in the section, right, that talks about what the section is going to be about, why the concept is important, and then go on to review the material. And reviewing the research consists of synthesis and analysis. So I'm going to get to that right now. Synthesis, what is synthesis? So your professors typically don't want to see an annotated bibliography, right? They don't want to see one study and then another study and then another study and then another study. They want to see the material synthesized, right? So what's that mean? Synthesis just means bringing things together into a whole, right? So you combine information from studies to make your points. And we're going to get even more kind of granular here about organization, talk about the paragraph level, because I understand it's difficult. And here's why. Because when you're writing at this high academic level, it's challenging. You're dealing with ideas that may be new, ideas that may be difficult, and it's challenging to kind of understand things, but then you have to turn around and relate it to a reader in a way that makes sense in an organized, intelligible manner. So it's challenging. It's challenging on a couple different levels. So that's why I say go to the level of the paragraph. And sometimes you'll hear professors say, use the meal plan, and you're like, what the heck is the meal plan? All right, and the meal is an acronym. I think it's evidence, analysis, lead in. I forget what the M means. But really it's just paragraphing structure that you probably learned in junior high, middle school, or even elementary school. I don't know where we learn it, but it's just standard paragraphing, right? So that's why I say synthesize at the paragraph level, and use standard paragraph organization strategy. Topic sentence, right? What's a paragraph about? Evidence and discussion of the topic, right? A few sentences, it illustrates what you're talking about, what you said you're going to talk about in the topic. And in this case, when we're talking about the lit review, it includes noting where findings differ from and align with one another, right? So part of what you're going to be doing is showing where the findings of studies, they contrast or where they compare. And a summary sentence, transition to the next topic, right? One sentence. That's how we learn to write paragraphs, main idea, evidence, and then some kind of summary sentence at the end. So that's what this looks like. This is an example of a synthesis, of paragraph, right? But synthesizing information in what something might look like in your lit review, right? So it's color-coded. Topic sentence. Research has mostly shown that health literacy is an important factor in diabetic self-control and positive outcomes. Okay, your topic sentence. So everything else should kind of follow what that's about, and everything in green does. I'm not going to read all that, but you can see where the green starts and the green ends. But this is material from different studies that supports that idea, right? And then you have the summary sentence. But I want to draw yourself to a couple things. There's some analysis in here too, because you want to, an analysis is part of the lit review, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So you're not just covering it. Here's what they're, reviewing it. Here's what they said. Here's what they studied. Here's what they found. Whenever you can, you want to analyze what are the strengths and weaknesses of the research, right? Is there a shortcoming? Maybe they didn't focus on what you're focusing on. That would be a great place to, highlight the need for your study, right? So let's look at the topic sentence again. It says recent research has mostly shown that health literacy is an important factor in diabetic self-control and positive outcomes. That word mostly is important because when we get down to I don't know, it's probably about the fourth sentence up from the bottom. It says, unlike Anders et al. And Gregory et al., Phillips et al. Found no statistically significant relationship between diabetes knowledge and glycemic control, which they attributed to a small sample size and possibly errors associated with self-reported instruments. Now, there's one that doesn't fit all the rest, right? So that's where that word in the topic sentence, research has mostly shown, right? Mostly, not all of it, because we have one here that didn't show what all the other ones showed. But you also have a little bit of analysis here, right? Which they contributed, which they contributed to a small sample size and possibly errors associated with self-reported instruments. So a little analysis thrown in there. And then at the end, empirical evidence from recent research largely supports, there's that qualifying word again, right? Most of it does, but not this one. And there was probably a reason for that. So that's an example of how to synthesize, right, at the paragraph level using this the material from the studies to make a point, stick to your point. And again, with a little analysis thrown in there, which can involve noting shortcomings or gaps of the studies. And what we did there is we noted a possible weakness, note trends and gaps in the research, reiterate the research problem and the need for your study where appropriate. So whenever you get a chance in the lit review 2, you want to again drive towards that research problem, right? This study was very close to what you're doing, but it had a different population, right? That's worth mentioning. Mention that yours is designed to study this other population that hasn't been studied before. So anywhere you get a chance to to kind of, analyze these studies, you want to do that, and to reiterate the need for your study, you want to do that. Because remember, the whole thing culminates in an argument for conducting your study, for why the research problem needs to be addressed. Okay, and we're at the next section. Again, consult your template. Sometimes some schools have other sections, a few little sections after this, but usually it's a summary. Recap major points from the chapter, remind the reader of the research problem based on what you have reviewed and what's not in the literature also, right? Reiterate the need for your study. Yeah, I know that's, it seems like there should be a lot more to the literature review. And I mean, there is, and it all comes in this section right here, the review of the literature. That's gonna be your big challenge. But again, focus on you want to focus. It's not, remember that the lit review is not a general discussion of your topic, right? And it's not written like a research paper. Okay, it's a study, and you're reviewing material to support the need for your study, and you're reviewing material that's only on what you're doing, right? It's easy to go down rabbit holes and to say, well, this is connected to this about my study, and which is connected to this, which is connected to this. And you look up and you're 10 ideas away from what you're really studying. So avoid that. Try to keep the focus. And what I do sometimes when I help people with their research in general, I'll pull out the research questions, the purpose, and the research problem. Now, all those things, that's from chapter 1, but they need to align. And sometimes I just pull those out, so I have them separately. So if I need to kind of recall what, get my focus back, right, what the study's about, I can just go to those elements and say, oh yeah, this is what this study is about. This is what I should be focusing on. It's kind of a reminder, right? So to help you kind of when you start to steer off track. Okay, a couple of helpful tools. Forgot about these. Just want to mention these. There's something called Research Rabbit, and it's an AI, and but it doesn't write things for you, so it's not that kind of AI. And there's another one called Connected Papers. I think one is free and one has a free component, but I think most of it's for pay. But you might want to check them out. And what they are, the Research Rabbit, it kind of it lets you search for material within it, and it kind of streamlines the process, the research process. It shows you like conceptual map between how, like one study relates to another study and how those two studies relate to yet another study, right? So it could help you with organization, like grouping studies together that need to be in a certain section. But they generally make it easier to access, manage, organize large amount of information, which is what you're going to have. Conceptual maps, right? So it's a tool to help you kind of manage these articles, and to kind of helps you see how they relate. Connected Papers is similar, but there's the website if you wanted to go and check and see what they're about. I'm not going to give you any kind of tutorial or anything about them, because there's much better and more focused tutorials right on the websites than I can give. But I just want to let you know that they exist and that we exist, right? Obviously. And here is, again, our contact information. If you want to schedule a consultation, it's free. Somebody will talk to you more in depth about what we offer and what we do. But in the meantime, to go to our website. Again, it has blogs on topics, on chapters. We have templates. They're general templates. They're not, specifically school templates, but they're general. They're give you a good general idea, and just all kinds of other resources and webinars too, which are archived. You can also check our webinar schedule. We webinars on different chapters and also different components of studies. So we always have a webinar going on. So check that to see if there's any more you want to attend, and I'll take questions if anybody wants to type question into the Q&A box. Any questions? I'll give you a couple minutes. Do I have the presentation on the website? Yeah, I think, let me see, you should be getting, everybody who attends should be getting the webinar, the slides, and the verbal component. And I believe this is also archived on the website. Any other questions about the chapter 2? Hold on. When writing your review, okay, let me see. Hold on, I'm going to read this so everybody can hear it. When writing your review, do I include satellite factors? Can you tell me what satellite factors are? I'm not sure what those are. And yeah, okay. If it relates but not directly related. No, yeah, this is kind of what I was saying earlier about kind of going down rabbit holes and kind of getting you should stick as closely as you can to what you're studying. So if something's related but you're not studying it, I would leave it out. Can you talk about repetition and how to use it effectively throughout the lit review? I'm not sure what you're asking about repetition. Now there's going to be, repetition throughout the dissertation, because you're going to be doing things like restating the purpose. There is going to be some repetition in it, but the one thing you don't want to do is copy and paste material from one section to another, right? I mean, professors really frown on that. You only get 2 passes on that. Your purpose statement needs to stay the same whenever you use it, and your research questions need to stay the same. Once they're approved, those 2 things will always stay the same. But anything else you need to repeat, you shouldn't repeat it verbatim. Versus unnecessarily repeating information. Yeah, you don't want to unnecessarily repeat information. I mean, if there's some kind of overlap, repetition, that's fine, but just to repeat it, no, you don't want to do that. Okay, what are the differences between theoretical and conceptual structure and literature review on regarding to the qualitative research? Yeah, like if you're doing a quantitative study versus a qualitative study in the theoretical framework and the conceptual framework. Other than the framework itself, there should be no difference in how you structure it. I mean, you're going to be structuring it according to the very things you're studying. So it's if it's quantitative, it's going to be your factors and your variables. If it's qualitative, it's going to be your major concepts. Major ideas. So I mean that's still similar. Would you use a theoretical and conceptual framework for mixed methods? That's a good question. The mixed methods that we see a lot are usually predominantly one thing, and it has, like, for example, it'd be predominantly quantitative, and it'll have like a small qualitative component that kind of helps explain the qualitative part a little bit. In those cases, whatever the predominant portion of the study is, I would use that for theoretical framework if it's predominantly quantitative, conceptual framework if it's predominantly qualitative. If it's kind of split in the middle, you may need to use both, but The real answer to that question lies with your chair. That they would be able to guide you, because again, all studies are different. That's kind of my general answer to that, but more specifically, I mean, just work with your chair on that. How to critically evaluate the literature review. Are there specific criteria that should be covered to approach this? I'm not real sure what you're saying. To critically evaluate the literature or the literature review. Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at the studies, some of the material that you want to extract from the studies to cover include things like, what was the purpose of the study? You know, what were the researchers trying to find out? What were the participants? How many were there? How was the study conducted? What type of study was it, and what were the findings? You know, those things are important when you're reviewing a study. There's certain components that you want to pull out of it to talk about it in relation to yours, and those are usually it. You know, purpose of the study, type of study, how the data was analyzed, and especially the findings. The findings are important. Okay, let's see, and we got some more. How do you ensure that your research topic has not been conducted by anyone anywhere? That's good, and that has to do with the comprehensiveness of your search. And also, you know, there are little ways to tweak things too. You know, because yeah, there's so many studies and so much stuff, and you know, things like leadership in general, transformational leadership, emotional intelligence. I mean, there's things that have been studied a lot. You go to the literature and see what's there, and you know, see what at the ends of these studies, usually there'll be recommendations for further research. See what people are recommending, right? And then that gives you some, you know, something to go on, and you can go and look. But you just have to kind of see what's in there. And if something's been conducted on what you're doing, sometimes you can tweak it. You know, it doesn't mean that everything is lost. It just means maybe you have to use a different population, or maybe kind of like take a different approach to it, or use a different theory, or put a different spin on it, right? It can be real similar, but it has something that would make it different. But there's no absolute ironclad guarantee that, you know, you're going to be able to say it's never been conducted. But if you do a pretty comprehensive lit review, you should probably be pretty sure. And then, you know, a way to frame that too, word wise, is just to, you know, no research could be found. You don't have to say there is no research, but that you couldn't find any. It's a little kind of different wording. How do you link theoretical framework to study methodology? There's no easy answer to that, but you know, the theoretical framework helps to guide what you're doing. So and it helps to explain your results once you get your results. It's not so much that the theory is linked to the methods, but what you want to find out is linked to the methods. So like if you're looking at the relationship between two constructs, and that's all you want to determine is if these two constructs are related, then that would be correlational. That's how it would link there. And then your theory might help explain, if it's emotional intelligence and transformational leadership, you'd have those two theories. They might help to explain that relationship once you get the findings. But usually the design and the methodology go hand in hand. And that's linked to what you want to find out, like the information you need to get. You know, like, do you need to just see if these constructs are related? Okay, correlational is fine. Do you need to know if one thing causes another, right? Causal relationship. Then you'd have to do something more experimental. And that gets into methodology, which we do have webinars on methodology, and I would encourage you to take one of those. Okay, so that's that. Lynette, Research Rabbit can help. Okay, good. Someone gives a shout out to Research Rabbit. Okay. Have you seen dissertations where the theory comes after you explain the problems seen in the research? Yeah, in chapter 1, is that what you're talking about? The theory comes after you explain the problem. You're just talking about where it comes in chapter 1, the section? Yeah, I've seen that. Okay. Okay, if that wasn't what you were expecting, just clarify it and I'll try to answer it. Thank you for the session. Can you demonstrate how to search literature and also how to write it? Yeah, I can include demonstration on how to search for literature. I can include that in the next one. I'll be sure to make a note here to put that in. And how to write it. I mean, I can probably add a little more on the, on the writing components, but like the example that I gave with the paragraph. I mean, it might be something like that. Okay, but that's good. That's good use for the future. Thank you. We still have more. Let me see. How to critically evaluate. Okay. Are there any more questions? I think I covered them all. I tried to. Okay, it is in chapter 2 still, but the writer addresses the issues seen in bias in criminal justice system and disparate outcomes. Explain how this is seen in research. And after you state the evidence, you provide the theory. Yeah, you can do it that way. I've seen it. You can do it that way. I've seen to see how the theory connects to what you've read. Yeah, you can do that. Seen that. Okay, great. Any other questions? Well, I want to thank everybody for coming and for asking these good questions and giving me suggestions for future webinars. Okay, you're welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. Everybody, take care.